Hi, my name is Julia Getty, and I am an instructor for the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And I am here to talk to you about the social discipline window. So let's pull that up so that you can see it. Okay, so this is a simplified version that we're going to start with. And I want to say a couple of things about the social discipline window before we dive in. First, I want to say that this is a tool that can be used by anyone in a position of authority to recognize whether they are exercising their authority in a restorative manner. So as you get to know this window, this will be something you think about a lot, and you'll use it in the moment, but then you'll also use it perhaps after something has happened to sort of evaluate or examine, was I being restorative in that situation? The other thing I want to mention about the social discipline window is that this is really one of the main cornerstones of restorative practices. So this definitely furnishes a lot of the language we use. It is probably the one thing that when we talk about being restorative, this defines what we mean. Okay, so I want to start first by identifying the axes that are illustrating the quadrants that are in the window. So the first axis is the one on the left, and that is the control axis. The second axis is the one on the bottom, which is support. I want to say a little note about this word control. Sometimes people struggle a little bit with the word control because most of us do not want to, we do not aspire to be controlling. So I do want to mention that in this instance, the word control is referring to things like, as you can see, limit setting, discipline, but also high accountability, high expectations. So some people like to use the word accountability as opposed to control, and that's fine. For our purposes, though, I'm going to stick with control. And then down here, support, of course, is defined by encouragement, nurture, warmth, loving, things along that line. So I want to talk about what an authority figure looks like in each of these quadrants. And I'm going to try and give some quick examples that relate to the teaching world. So imagine a teacher in this lower left quadrant who is low on control and low on support. As you can imagine, this would probably be the teacher who is really not paying attention to their class at all. They might have feet up on the desk, magazine open, scrolling through the phone. There's perhaps a lot of chaos in the room. Students know that they can do pretty much whatever they want to do. Certainly no learning is happening in this type of environment. If we take a teacher who is high on control, yet low on support, that's the upper left quadrant. What that might look like is you would have a teacher who has high expectations. That teacher holds students accountable. Unfortunately, they don't tend to have the scaffolding in place that allows students to get to those high expectations, to achieve those high expectations. So what tends to happen is there's a lot of frustration on the teacher's part because students aren't performing the way that the teacher expects. So there may be a lot of discipline, often punitive discipline. Sometimes there is some learning happening because students don't want to be punished, and so they do put effort in. But that learning can come at a cost. First of all, it doesn't work for every student. And even for the students that it does work for, the cost is not a strong supportive relationship with that teacher. And the other cost is that often students are anxious. They don't want to be in that room. They're not comfortable. So that is definitely not what we're looking for. On the opposite end of the spectrum would be the quadrant that is high support and low control. So as you could imagine, you would probably get the opposite results. This would be perhaps a classroom where students love to go because the student knows them and knows everything that's going on with them and understands all of their troubles and their challenges, and often will maybe bend the rules for them and lower the expectations, because to this teacher, it's the support that's the most important. And of course, it is important, and that might build a loving relationship. Unfortunately, the student, when it comes to the learning outcomes, is not going to reach that level of expectation that a teacher would hope for them to have. So, you know, just support by itself and just control by itself don't tend to be the best measures. Obviously, this quadrant is blue, so this is the sweet spot. This is the high control, high support. It means a teacher has high expectations, high accountability, but also that teacher cares about their students. They too understand if something is happening in their lives that is maybe affecting their learning or their ability to get their work done. Yet at the same time, they're not going to completely throw expectations out the window. They're going to work with that student and keep expectations as high as possible while keeping support as high as possible. And research shows us that this is where the best learning occurs, and also where the strongest relationships are built. So I want to then show you what the complete window looks like. This includes the labels for each of the quadrants. So you can see the first quadrant we talked about is what we call the not quadrant. So that means nobody's doing anything. It's not happening, also known as neglectful. Again, the high control, low support, we call that the to box because people are doing things to other people and often in a punitive manner. The high support, low control box, we call that the for box. We also call that being permissive. So letting people get away with things, losing that sense of accountability. And then of course, the high control or the high support box is the with box. That is where you know you're being restorative, and we will often use that terminology as sort of a shorthand for being restorative. Are you being with right now, or are you being to, or are you being for? So you will hear us talk a lot about that. So I do want to talk a little bit too about, so we talked about how different people can fall into the boxes at most of the time. So their overall personality or style could be to or for or not or with. But I also want to mention as individuals, we can also fall into these boxes often within the course of a very short period of time. If we have something very emotional going on, we might jump from box to box as we are interacting with other people and as more information comes to light. So it is very possible in a short period of time to bounce from box to box. The other thing I want to mention is that oftentimes we can trace sort of a restorative journey for ourselves that takes us through these various boxes. And I am going to use another example, actually a personal example from my life that's a parenting example. As you can imagine, this is a tool that can be used in parenting extremely effectively. So I have a teenage daughter, and when she was younger, I used to occasionally buy her some clothes. We are not professional shoppers by any stretch of the imagination, but I would occasionally buy her something, and I would bring it home, and about 75% of the time she would respond with either indifference or yeah, I don't like that, or oh yeah, I like that, and it would go in the closet and she would never wear it. So after a while I learned, right? I really learned that I was kind of being in this not box. Like I was buying her something that she was expected to wear, but I didn't even ask her. I didn't ask her, do you like this? Do you want this? Should I buy it? Right? So I was very much being in the not box at that time. So when I kind of had that realization, I thought, oh, okay, well, you know what? I won't buy you anything on my own anymore. I learned that lesson. So we would occasionally go shopping, and I would find something that I thought would look fabulous on her, and I would show it to her, and she might say, yeah, I like that. And she might even try it on. And, we'd be in the dressing room, and I'd say, well, do you want to get it? And she'd say, sure. And I'd say, okay, great. And we'd get it. And interestingly enough, even though she said, yeah, I do want that, and you can get that for me, oftentimes a year or two later, it was still in her closet with the tags on. Now, needless to say, that was equally frustrating. And I would get kind of upset about that until I realized that I was being in the 4 box in that case. Like I was just letting her say, yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, I'll have that. And I was buying it for her and just, you know, shuttling it up to her closet. So I couldn't understand, right? I was like, you told me you wanted this. We agreed it looked good on you. Why are you not wearing this? She couldn't understand it either. She didn't know. She's a teenager, young adolescent. So at this point, I got angry. There was one year where we were cleaning out the closet and I'm pulling things out and anything that had a tag on it, I'm like, this has a tag on it, this has a tag on it. So I pretty quickly jumped to the 2 box. I was like, I'm not buying you anything ever again, right? Which of course is not going to be true, but I was super frustrated and angry and lashing out and yelling. So very much in the 2 box. So then I realized that I needed to take more of a with approach. So after consulting with my husband and coming up with a plan, because remember, we're the authority figures. So we came up with a plan and we presented her with the plan and asked for her feedback. So the plan was that she would, anything that she needed, we would buy. So in other words, she had a pretty strict dress code for school. So school clothes, yep, we'll buy those. We'll buy socks, we'll buy underwear, we will buy 1 pair of school clothes, shoes, 1 pair of sneakers, 1 winter coat, 1 bathing suit. You know, so anything that was sort of deemed necessary, we would pay for. Anything above and beyond that, anything that she might say, oh, I really like that, or I really want that, she would have to kick in half. So she had money from birthdays and holidays and babysitting and odd jobs and all of that kind of stuff. So she had a, you know, half decent little nest egg. So we presented her with this proposal. And at first she pushed back a little bit, but then she was like, all right, I'll give it a try. So we tried it. And the next time we went shopping and she tried something on and she loved it and I loved it. And I said, you want to get it? And she was like, sure. And I looked at the price tag and I said, are you willing to pay whatever half the amount was? And she stopped and she thought, and she said, actually, no, I don't think so. And I went, okay. And then we put it back on the rack. And you know what? 9 out of 10 times she would come to that conclusion and say, no, it's not worth my own money. And I can't tell you what a difference that made in our relationship, because I was no longer frustrated. I was no longer wasting time and money. And she wasn't frustrated either. So this was a great example of how we kind of came into the with box together. And after traveling through the other boxes, and it really strengthened our relationship. And that could have been something that over the years could have gotten really destructive. So that's just an example. Okay, so I also want to mention that this is by no means a brand new idea. Many of you probably intuitively know this, but what this is an explicit expression or an explicit framework of being restorative, what we mean when we say we want to be restorative. So I do want to mention at this point that the aim of restorative practices, so in other words, why are we doing this, is to develop community and to manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm and restoring relationships. So this is the goal of restorative practices. And that developing community part, that's what we want to be doing 80% of the time with our proactive practices, developing that community so that when these conflicts and tensions come up, then we can repair that harm, which is the other 20% of the time that we're using restorative practices. And the other part that I just want to end with is the fundamental hypothesis. So I think you've already heard this already, but I'm going to state it again because it's super important. The fundamental hypothesis of restorative practices is that human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. So obviously you can see that it is the social discipline window that allows us to live the fundamental hypothesis. It's what allows us to understand whether we are actually being with people rather than acting in a way that is to or for them. So thanks for your time and attention. I hope you have a great day.